So welcome to the second annual Yard by Yard lecture. My name's Alice Wilson. I'm delighted to welcome you all this morning on behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement. Many of you know this was started last year by Layla Durstein, who is out on maternity leave at the moment. She had twins back at the end of the summer, and so she's been a busy girl. But we also want to make mention that starting at 10:15, President Mandel will be here as well to do a Q&A and a little presentation, so if you'd like to stay for that, that's great. We're especially pleased to have Michael Sardo this morning as our lecturer with the talk From Here to Here, which I think is amazing. I think this really sums up Michael's journey from Williams student to Hollywood and back to teaching screenwriting in the Department of English. He graduated in '81, landed his first job in Hollywood, and you're going to see how he actually really got there, and is now back as a visiting lecturer. He's worked, as you probably know, on hundreds of episodes of television. My favorite, Wings, thank you, Picket Fences, Caroline in the City, Rizzoli Isles, another favorite. He's written plots for the major studios, creator, showrunner, executive producer, all that stuff, and he's going to talk about all these wonderful things that he's done. If you have questions, just save them for the end. He's going to do a little Q&A at the end, so thank you for saving those till then. And I'm very, very pleased to welcome Michael Sardo. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you for being here. Sorry about the cold. It's a Brenda Vaccaro-like thing for those of you who know who Brenda Vaccaro is, which will sort you by ages right away. So a lot of people ask me, like John Ballin, how do you get to Hollywood? How do you get a career going in Hollywood? It's a little different than other careers because no one comes up and interviews you to be a writer and says, hey. So how did it start? Okay, so the first thing is from there to here. So where was there and how did I get here? I grew up in the Bronx. I was the first person in my family to go to college. Now we call it first gen. But like a lot of things, I guess, like electronics, things have gotten shorter and smaller. We used to just say, I'm the first person in my family to go to college instead of first gen. To give you an idea of how long a distance that was, I'm from a half Italian, half Irish family. And my cousins, nieces, nephews, the next person in my family to go to college was our son in 2012. So it was quite a long road. Sort of emblematic about visiting Williams with my friend Jim. We didn't have a car. I had this friend Jim who had a Chevy Nova, and he said, I'll drive you around. So we got to Williams, and I was being interviewed by Phil Smith, and we had a very nice interview. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what college was, really. And he said, who are you here with? And I said, Jim. And he said, oh, well, I'd like to meet Jim. So I said, sure. So I opened the door. I said, hey, Jim. So Jim was 18, perpetually stoned. He had long hair down to here. He had a suede fringe jacket that hung down to here. He managed to get through most of a semester at Reed College after this, but that was pretty much it for college with Jim. And Phil, just without missing a beat, said, hi, Jim. Nice to meet you. How's your trip going? And in some ways, I feel like that was emblematic of my time here, where it was such an odd environment for me. I didn't understand the dress code. I didn't understand the speaking code. But the students and the teachers were all much more welcoming and understanding of me than I was of myself, which I think is sort of emblematic of the place. To show you that I knew nothing about going to college, do not get a perm the week you're going to get your high school picture taken, okay? The gold glasses, that's my fault. The jacket that looks like you're the assistant waiter at an Italian restaurant on the Upper East Side, that was my school's fault. But the hair, that's a whole other subject. So my father's advice on going to Williams was this. If you get straight A's, like he thought that was a possibility, if you get straight A's, my money's wasted. He said, because you have a chance to meet people from all over the world. If you get a chance to talk to a kid from Oklahoma, like to him that was the whole world, Oklahoma. He said, stay up all night and talk to that kid. You can study for the test later. You can study in the summer. And I think it was great advice, because that's what you get here that you can't get looking up things on Wikipedia or in a book. You get people. And I spent all my time here with people. I didn't play a sport. I was really popular at the log. I was actually on the log committee, which was a very important thing. I also had the very important thing of being the treasurer for Pratt House. So this is damaged. One water pressure extinguisher is missing. 1 man-hour, $9.73, so we paid a fine. So I paid all the fines for the parties at our dorm. This one, 2 legs broken off. I took care of it, wrote a check for $8.23. It's pretty much the extent of my finance interest. But mostly I had a radio show on the radio station, which comes into play in a big way later on. In the background, those are what's called carts. And carts are ads or promos for things on the radio station. And I was in charge of making all those. I was the production director. I also did, some friends of mine had a literary magazine that they started. And I interviewed these 2 writers, Nick Delbanco and Harry Matthews. And one of the big things that came out of it was, can you teach writing? And it was a really interesting thing, because I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a fiction writer. But when I met them, I decided I didn't want to be a fiction writer. You know, it's just meeting these 2 people. I'm sorry, Jim and Karen know them. But it was, I just thought, it's a whole other story. But the way it all came about, I didn't want to be them. But we had this whole debate about whether or not you could teach writing. And I thought it was a really interesting thing, because I thought I want to learn. But I didn't know how to get there. I was brought down by Ogilvy and Mather for a day of interviews. And somehow I found this letter. I must have written a really strong letter about why I didn't get the job. Like I was really confused by that. And somebody took 2 pages to explain why I didn't get the job. And she was really right. It was good that I didn't get the job. But at that time, I was told, you know, very creative, go into advertising, which is creative. But it's just not what I wanted to do. I had done an internship one summer. I mostly worked construction in the summer, but I did an internship at a public relations firm called Reuter & Finn. I wound up having 2 accounts on my own at the end of the summer. And then I went back to school, and I thought I would go into advertising. And then I had a lot of talks with Fred. Who's Fred? Fred is Fred Rudolph, who some of you may be aware of. And I didn't know how many sort of surrogate sons Fred had, but I was very privileged to be one of them. And Fred gave me, through his classes and through dinners at his house and through hanging out by his beer fridge, the confidence to just be who I wanted to be, whatever that meant, and to really explore wherever that was going to go. And he said, you know, you're not going to go a conventional path. But his thing was always, he would say to me, you can't afford it, but you ought to be a teacher. And I had too many college loans, too many family obligations to really think about that at the time, but that also stuck in my head. Eventually, I was the class speaker at graduation. Hair got a little better. It took about 2 years to get the process out. I gave a speech called The Real World, Williams College and Blackberry Wine, which was about defining yourself in your own way. And then the problem with that is I had to do it to myself. So this pretty much represents the summer after graduation. I had no job. I was painting my father's house because he just would give me some money, like, you know, for a beer and a sandwich. And I really was clueless about what to do with this wonderful education I had and how to make that path to becoming a writer. I was writing a lot, but I didn't know what to do with it. I mean, it's hard even for me now to think of a pre-internet, pre-computer time. It was hard to get access to information. You know, fiction writers were just people who sat in a room, like Jim and Karen, and just wrote and wrote forever. But eventually I got a call from the public relations firm, and I started working there, not really full-time. They always paid me freelance, but it was 4 or 5 days a week. And then I came up for homecoming 1981, so this is one of the inflection points of my life. There was a woman who I'd known 4 years at Williams. We wound up having one of those all-night talks, and we started dating. She lived in LA, was working in DC. We went back and forth. Meantime, I was working at Reuter & Finn, which is the public relations firm. And they wound up offering me a full-time job, like a really great job. 3 days a week in fine arts public relations, 2 days a week writing speeches for the president of the company. And I turned it down. So they offered me a little more money, and I turned it down a second time, and then I turned it down a third time. And they were really confused. So I went in and met with the senior vice president, and he said, "What's the deal with you? It's very hard to get a job here." And I said, it's a really nice place to work. It's great. Office was, I could see Bloomingdale's outside my office. It was lovely. I said, "But I don't want to be the best writer at a PR firm." And he thought about it, and he said, "I was going to be a writer too. And now I'm the senior vice president of this firm." He said, "I'll tell you what, you go, and there's a job waiting for you whenever you want it," which was super sweet. So I told my dad that I was leaving, and he disowned me, and then he said, "I'll go with you." He doesn't drive. He doesn't stop talking. So my sister had sold her Fiat 124, actually had it towed to a junkyard, and I bought it back for $50. And I had a friend for $200 fix it up, and he said, "You can make it across the country as long as you go under 50 miles an hour." So with my dad, who doesn't drive and doesn't stop talking, it took about 6 weeks to get across the country. This is a side view of the car. And the interesting thing is, in here is all of his luggage for a 6 weeks trip and everything I went to California with. And it doesn't make it up to the window. Eventually, skipping ahead a bit, I was driving my girlfriend's mother to work one morning in LA. I was on the 101, I was doing 60, and the car started filling with white smoke. And I hit the brakes, hit the gas, nothing was working. And the only reason I'm here today is somebody in a Honda Civic, thank you wherever you are, saw what was happening, got behind me, put their flashers on, slowed down, and went over lane by lane so I could get off the freeway and drive into a telephone pole to stop. So I had the car picked up by AAA, and then I called the garage and I said, "Hey, how's my car?" And he said, "When it rained, did the floor get wet?" And I said, "Yeah, I always thought that was really strange because I never had a car before." And he said, "Well, the entire floor was rotted out." And he said, "What happened is the transmission dropped out, ripped out the brake and gas lines, which was a really good thing because otherwise your seat would have fallen through within the next week or two because there was no floor left." It was a very sad time. I had 100 resumes made because, all filled up with bullshit because, I hadn't really done anything. And I thought, why do I need 100? But that's the minimum you could get. So I dropped 100 of these off at production companies and studios. Then I got another box of 100, dropped those off. Then I got a third box of 100, and I thought I've got to try something else because I couldn't get a job anywhere. So I started applying for jobs at restaurants, and it turns out that people in restaurants, you think everyone does something else. They just wanted to know that you wanted to work in a restaurant. So I kept taking things off my resume, and then it got to the point where I would interview, and they'd say, "Well, did you go to college?" I said, "No, worked in a restaurant." Finally, I got a job at a restaurant. Oh, this is where I ate every day. Tom's Number 5. It was $2.10 for a double chili cheeseburger. And I was in there one day, and I heard this commotion, and someone had died in the entryway. And I thought it was like World According to Garp, well, that can't happen twice. And then a week later, someone died in the doorway. But in the meantime, yes, I was offered a job doing continuing medical education videos for doctors, which was really bizarre. When I was at Ruder & Finn, they had me represent myself as working for JETRO, which is the Japanese External Trade Organization. And I was actually analyzing Mitsubishi and the sentiment of Mitsubishi in the US so that they could time their buyout from Chrysler. I didn't have a car. I didn't know anything about cars. And now I was writing things for doctors and continuing medical education. So if you've ever had a bad procedure, I might have had something to do with that. This is Fig Trees, where I got my first restaurant job. It was an organic restaurant, one of the first in Venice. This is a current picture. And they also were known for their coffee. I don't try not to eat anything organic. I think I'm going to be preserved for a few hundred years, and I've never had a cup of coffee. So, but by that time, I had pumped up my career experience in restaurants so big that the manager of the restaurant said, well, because you have so much experience, you can open the restaurant alone. So I got there at 5 in the morning, which usually I would go to bed at 5 in the morning, but I would never get up at 5 in the morning. And they opened at 6, and it was packed. And I never worked in a restaurant, and everyone had different kinds of coffee in these French brew coffee things, which was really unusual for 1982. And it was a disaster. So I just kept comping everyone's meals. I'd say, I'm so sorry. It's on the house. It's on the house. And then at the end of the day, and made an amazing amount of tips. I made like $200 the first day. And then at the end of the day, the manager said, can I have all the checks in order? They were just those little green checks. And I said, oh. I had thrown them all out. And I said, you know, my handwriting's really bad. So I was really embarrassed at how bad they are, but I'll rewrite them now. So I made up a whole bunch of checks, like much less than the amount of food, because they couldn't understand why so much food was missing from the kitchen. And it seemed like we hadn't had any customers. But I got a lot better at working as a restaurant. But there's a theme running through here, which is pretending to do what you can't do. I worked for 2.5 years at a Mexican restaurant in the mall, Tampico Tilly's, in Santa Monica Place. But this whole time, I was writing. And when I was preparing this talk, I found boxes and boxes and boxes of scripts. Things that I looked at and I went, what is this topic? Who wrote this? I have no memory of it. I went to this French restaurant, Nicole's. Myself, I'd never been in a restaurant until I was 14. And my very first customer was Gene Hackman. It was near 20th Century Fox. And he ordered steak tartare. I had no idea what steak tartare was. So I went to the maitre d' and I said, you know, every place I've worked, they make steak tartare really specifically. I want to make sure I make the Nicole's steak tartare. So he wheels this cart over, gets the raw meat, the egg, all this thing. I just thought it was disgusting. And I wasn't even really looking. I was looking away. And then I said, I'll never have to do that again. And then my second customer said, I'll have the steak tartare. How he lived through that experience, I really don't know. I eventually was fired when I was waiting at a table for a group of executives, and I spilled champagne on a guy who had $2,000 worth of cocaine in his pocket. So that led to 1985, the year of ham and cheese. So I decided what I had to do was cut my expenses. So I quit my job, and I decided that every day for a year I would eat the same thing. So every morning I would have a ham and cheese omelet. Every afternoon I would have 2 grilled ham and cheese sandwiches. Every night I would have 2 Swanson chicken pot pies. I couldn't afford to fly home for Thanksgiving, but I treated myself. I had 2 turkey pot pies, which were 10 cents extra. And I wrote a whole ton. And yet nothing happened. At the same time, though, I had taken my girlfriend to audition at the Groundlings improv group in Hollywood. And while I was waiting for audition, the director came out and said, are you here for an audition? I said, yeah, sure. He said, have you done a lot of acting? I said, have you heard of Williams College? He goes, yeah. He said, they have a good acting program. I said, yeah. So the Groundlings at that time was known for what's called big wig and big hat pieces, which I personally hated. This was someone else's scene. I have no idea what it was about. I'm wearing a giant hat. I really wanted to do more odd things using the stage in a weird way. For the first 5 months I was in the show, I didn't get a single piece in. And I was ready to quit. A friend of mine said, well, just wait 1 more week. And a new director came in. And when the new director came in, all of a sudden he put in all my pieces. So the first one, Hug for Health, there was, at the time, a guy named Leo Biscaglia, who was known as the Hugging Doctor. And so this was a piece that started in the audience. And it was 10 or 12 minutes of me, and all in brown, with a brown turtleneck, with a bad comb over. And I would get people to hug each other that I knew would never want to hug each other, because I was telling them it was really good for them. And it was a tremendously awkward, uncomfortable piece that was bulletproof. I did it for 4 or 5 months. And then one day I come in from the audience, and from the back, and I start doing the piece, and the people on the left are really, really laughing, and the people on the right are dead silent. And then a whole bunch of them get up and leave. And I keep doing with the piece, and luckily I'm in a brown turtleneck because my sweat stains are getting gigantic. And I keep doing the piece, and the people on the left, now they're just watching the people on the right. More people get up and leave, but then they come back. And this keeps going on. And 12 minutes is a really, really long time for this to happen. Piece ends. The people on the right applaud maniacally. I was like, I go backstage. I go, what is going on? And everyone is laughing, because what I didn't know is the people on the right were all outpatients from a methadone clinic. And they were heavily medicated. And they were required to use the payphone in the lobby every half hour, 45 minutes to call in and say where they were. But they thought it was really funny not to tell me. But I learned how to proceed no matter what the audience is doing. Coming out of that, out of the Groundlings, Cassandra Peterson was a Groundling, asked me and two other people to write Elvira's Halloween MTV special, which was 3.5 hours that I acted in and wrote for $750. And then I wrote Kids Incorporated, which is where the first show for Fergie, Mario Lopez, a whole bunch of like these people who you can't believe they've been acting the whole time. At this point, I've been out of school 5 years. And I remember one night, I'm getting ready to go to work, and I'm in my polyester pants. I'm wearing my vest that says, "Hello, my name is Michael." And the phone rings, and say, "It's the White House for Michael Sardo." And I go, "It's not the fucking White House, excuse me." But that's what I said. And I'm just saying, Maud Mandel, 10:15, less profanity, more profundity. So stick around for that. So it was my friend Rick, who was a White House fellow, calling to tell about his time on Air Force Two with Yasser Arafat, the first George Bush, who was vice president. He said, "How's it going with you?" It's going pretty good. Writing a lot. I came to Fifth Reunion, I got a phone call. I had applied. NBC, the head of NBC, Brandon Tartikoff, is a well-known genius of TV, had started a program to find new young writers. And it was a national competition, 400 people submitted, 10 were accepted, and I was one of the 10. And that was the letter waiting for me when I got home. So I got to go to the American Film Institute for 6 weeks with people representing the whole history of TV, from Your Show of Shows, and literally Sid Caesar, with the writers of Your Show of Shows, to Cheers and Family Ties. We did versions of our pieces for the actors. We had an acting troupe. But the thing is, because coming out of the Groundlings, I knew how to compact a pilot. You had to submit a pilot, a television pilot of half an hour or an hour. This was just comedy, so it was half hours the first year. But I knew how to make it into a 10-minute piece that made sense because of my time at the Groundlings. So then, I'll wait on that. So then I do the program, and we made a TV show in the summer. Dick Van Dyke was the host. We got to intro our pieces on camera. My dad was doing Rick Moranis' apartment. My dad's an electrician. And he said to Rick, "If you don't watch my son's show, I'm going to fix all the wiring in your house so nothing ever works." So Rick watched the show. I lived in this apartment behind a McDonald's in Sherman Oaks, which is really where you want to live then, because close to food. And I came down for breakfast after the show had played, and this was the headline of the LA Herald Examiner. And it truly was my big break. And saying the skit was the only one that's special. There was coverage, quite a lot of coverage all over the country. This was from the New York Times, which popped up again, which was interesting. Can the craft be taught? And it just kept popping up as a theme, and something I noticed as I went through my writing career. So Rick called me and said, call my friend Dick Blasucci at the Tracey Ullman Show. And I called Dick, and he'd just been fired. And he said, "Oh, call my friend Mark, who got the job." So I called Mark, and he said, "Hey, can you come in tomorrow with 5 ideas?" So I'd never seen the Tracey Ullman Show, and I didn't have a VCR. So I went and knocked at every building in my apartment, and I said, "Have you guys ever seen the Tracey Ullman Show? What's it like?" And I pitched Tracey Ullman Show was on the original Fox network. The idea was to bring people creative ideas that couldn't be done at any other network. So James L. Brooks, who created Taxi, Oscars, Emmys, everything, created the Tracey Ullman Show. So I went and pitched 5 ideas, and they bought one. I came in to get notes on it. I said, hey, I have another idea. I pitched it, they bought it. And then the writer's strike hit then. And it was 5.5 months of the writer's strike. And I had just quit my job. So I went to San Francisco, had a friend who was in law school. He let me stay on the couch. And then I had a friend who was an executive at Fox, and he got me a job because of what I'd done on the radio station that he knew, writing and producing radio spots for Dirty Dozen, the series. So you see, behind these sacred walls, Hitler is engineering his most evil secret weapon, but we can't go in there. They were very compelling, as compelling as the show. But I got $300 for each ad that I wrote and produced. One night, I was in the studio doing the final sound check, and the phone rang at 1 in the morning. The guy says, hey, it's Barry Diller. And again, I said, yeah, it's not fucking Barry Diller. And it was Barry Diller. He said, I want to hear the spots. And I was like, oh my God. So I held the phone up to the speaker, and I hear this guy screaming, going, more machine guns, more Hitler, more Hitler. I'm going, like, if I was running a studio, I'm not calling in for 30-second promos at 1 in the morning. I did all the promos for all their ads. For Beans Baxter, tomorrow night on Married with Children. For Mr. President, tomorrow night on 21 Jump Street. And it was a great job that I only got because of my experience at the radio station. And it really taught me a lot about how to compress an idea and pitch what's called a log line when you go to sell a show. How do you compress, take a big idea and make it small and make it palatable? Strike ended on a Thursday. On Friday, Jim Brooks called me and said, can you start Monday? I said, yeah. So I was on this staff with the people who were all from Cheers and Taxi. It was quite intimidating. We worked 7 days a week. I was in a tiny trailer that, for reasons no one has ever explained, it was covered with orange carpeting on all the walls. And I had this office. It's something out of a Wes Anderson movie. It had one tiny window, but it was a tiny window with a little mini blinds. And when you opened the blinds, you saw the back of the head of my assistant sitting in front of the window. It was a very odd place, but it was a wonderful place to work where there were no rules. You had a stage with 2 giant platters. Paula Abdul was our choreographer. Before she did her album, and actually the album came out and it didn't sell. And so we'd all go, let's go lunch and buy 20 more copies of Paula's album. We had boxes of Paula's album. And then one DJ in LA got obsessed with the song Straight Up and started playing it 2 or 3 times an hour. And all of a sudden it took off. But you could do something on the Tracey Show where you could say, I need 100 dancers tomorrow. And they go, okay. You could end a piece in a song, you could end it in any way you want. It was a wonderful thing with no notes given by anyone because Jim Brooks was such a giant. So the show I wrote, there were 5 pieces we submitted. I wrote 3 of them. The show won the Emmy. I was nominated for writing. And then I asked to leave the show. And my agent was out of his mind. And I said, the thing is that Jim is certifiably a genius, truly a genius. There's only so much you could learn. And everybody was just hanging back and waiting for Jim to do things because he was extraordinary. But somehow I got a 3-year deal at Lorimar Studios. And Lorimar, which then became part of Warner Brothers, at that time had 75 of us in 2 buildings. David Chase, who created The Sopranos, was next to me. Deborah Joy Levine, who did Lois and Clark, was across the way. The guys who did Married to the Mob were next to me. The guy who did Car Wash was across the way. And you would just wander around all day and talk to people. And they'd go, hey, can you help me with this show? Can you help me do this? And I was telling my wife, I looked at this box of stuff. I have no idea what these shows are. This was the 2nd episode of a Friends show. 50-Minute Man was shot. It was a show about a guy goes to his therapist for 50 minutes and explains how he solved a murder that week. He was like a nervous investigative reporter. YMCA, took place at a YMCA in the 50s. No idea what Jimmy the King is. No idea what Road Boy is. But for 3 years, just got to write what you wanted and sell what you wanted, which was fantastic. Coming out of that, it was really hard to get a job because at that time, Nobody wanted original material. They wanted you to write like someone else writes. Oh, I wrote an episode of Picket Fences during that time, which was super fun. And then Chuck Lorre took a chance and hired me on Grace Under Fire, which was the #1 show in the country at the time. And it's one of those things that, people say, I want to live in that nice house, and you find out that the person in the nice house is not having a great life. It was the most miserable experience of my career. So the woman who was the lead, she had a serious addiction problem. Underlying it were mental health issues. Underlying that was that she was really a bad person. Because you can start to say, yeah, it's the addiction, it's the mental health. No, she's a bad person. And it was a terribly abusive environment. My wife, Patrice, back there, and I had our son during the earthquake in '94. And the next day, they called and said, well, we need you in the office today. I said, I don't need to curse again, you get the idea. I said, no, I'll be back when I'm back. It was such an awful environment. One script was written, and the executives, the ABC and Carsey Werner executives were applauding the writers because it was so good. And Brett came in and jumped on the table, took the script, threw it against the wall, and said, I can't believe you would make me say this shit. Why are you doing this to me? It was like having a breakdown on the middle of the table, standing on the table, like, what is this? So the year ends, and Carsey Werner, which became known as the Monster Factory, they did Roseanne, they did Cosby, and they would just write checks to get everything to go away. So again, they offered me 3 raises, and I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I want to work somewhere else. And Chuck Lorre was great. He said, you can work on my next show. And I said, no, I'm not going to do it. But I had a 3-year contract. And they said, well, we're going to enforce it. You can't work for the next 2 years. And we just had a baby. And I said to my wife, I think it's time for us to go. And I called Fred Rudolph, and he said, I'll try to help you get a teaching job, but it'll be tough because I had a BA, not a master's or a PhD or anything. I hadn't published a novel. And a friend of ours who now runs Ridley Scott's company said, don't make a decision in a crisis, which was a really good thing. So my agent sent me to the guys who were running Wings and said, the staff is full, but this is just a courtesy meeting. And so I had this meeting that went for 2 hours or 2.5 hours or something, and they called Paramount and said, we have to make room for this guy. But it was a 60% pay cut from what I'd had before, which was really tough for the ego. But it wound up being the most wonderful experience. So I was there for 3 years. I did 76 episodes of it. I wrote 12, produced the 76, wrote the last episode, which was 172. The guys who created it were doing Frasier downstairs, so we would get together all the time. 2 of the creators, David Angel and Peter Casey, and I would meet every premiere day, and we'd have a drink to toast the smallest professional organization in the world, which is Catholic Comedy Writers of Hollywood. But the cast was great fun, and they really taught me how to run a show and how things go. And we'll talk a little bit about the specifics of it. When you're doing a multi-camera sitcom, the cameras are all there. There's the people. You have 4 cameras shooting. You have a master getting the whole picture. You have doubles or a single, and you have a camera getting ready to catch whatever's going to come in next. As you're shooting in front of a live audience, you're changing the script all the time. You're talking to concerned actors, and that line doesn't work, that scene doesn't work, so you get to rewrite on the fly all the time, which, coming here, I know this may shock you, but I didn't play football or lacrosse or basketball, but I stood on a corner and told stories. And it was the most difficult audience you could imagine, because the minute people didn't like what you were saying, they just walked away. It was like, hey, I got this great story. Yeah. So in this pressure-filled environment, it was less pressure than being on the corner, because nobody beat you up, and you got paid a lot of money for it. But it was really helpful for there. Coming out of Wings, my agent called and said, they want you on Friends. But what Patrice and I had decided after Grace Under Fire was I would never be in that situation again. Friends is a wonderful show. But they give a speech at the beginning of the year, David Crane would, of the day starts at 10, goes till midnight, no phones. Saturdays are 10 to 10. Sundays are 10 to 8. You will never leave earlier than that. I was in pre-production on a show before we were shooting. They had worked from 10 a.m. to 4 a.m. the next morning. And he said, you guys worked hard. Come in at 11. And I knew marriages that had broken up and things that had broken up. And I said, I'm not going to take the meeting. And my agent, I couldn't see him, but I could feel the veins bursting in his head. So he got me a meeting at Caroline City, which was not a great show. And I met with the creators and I said, not a great show. And they said, come on and fix it. So I went on as supervising producer, and a month they made me co-executive producer, and then 2 weeks after that said, you're running the show secretly, but we're not going to fire the showrunner. So we would film the show in front of a live audience, and then one of the creators and I would sit there and write an entire another script on the fly. And then after the audience went home, we'd shoot a whole second script, and that would be the one that would air, which was great practice. So coming out of that, though, the funny thing is doing that instead of Friends, what I didn't know is that Leah Thompson, the lead, a quick Leah story. So when I went out to LA, one of my roommates, Tom Hobart, said, hey, if you ever run into my old girlfriend out there, she wants to be an actress. I said, I don't really want to meet actresses. I want to meet writers and directors. So when I got the job at Caroline in the City, I got to say to Leah Thompson, hey, I think we know someone in common. And it was Tom Hobart, her boyfriend of 4 years in high school. So we sort of bonded over that. She thought it was going to be a lawyer or an agent. She then went to the head of NBC and said, I won't do the show unless Michael's running it. So they made me a crazy, front page of Variety 3-year deal. I ran the show. I sold a pilot. We got ready to shoot it. A new network head came in and fired all the people who had overall deals, including me. But what they did, you don't get fired in Hollywood. My lawyer called and said, they're going to give you 25 cents on the dollar. And I said, well, I'm doing another draft of the script. I said, you can do it, but they're giving you 25 cents on the dollar. And then I got a call back. They're going to give you 50 cents on the dollar, but they're really mad. I said, I'm mad too. I'm ready to work. I said, I'm writing the script, because everyone else had abandoned their pilots. And I just kept writing drafts and turning them in. And they didn't know what to do. I called and said, look, we'll give you 75 cents on the dollar. I said, hey, I'm here. I'm in my office. I said, unless you're going to lock me out. And then Sam called back. He was a very powerful attorney. And he said, they're going to give you 100 cents on the dollar. But you can never work there for as long as this guy's the president of the network. And I said, and I guess this is where the Bronx part comes in, I'll be getting paid long after he's gone. He lasted 10 months. And I kept getting paid for 2 years. So I did the only logical thing. I bought a boat. Named after my wife's middle name, Grace, and it's the state of being on the boat. It was quite lovely. And this became my office. I wrote movies that didn't get made, but were really fun to write. And then coming out of that period, again, I needed to get a job. I got a job on the show called The American Embassy, which we shot in London. It aired the first episode right before 9/11. In the pilot, someone blows up the American Embassy in London. So you really can't separate what goes on in pop culture from culture. And how you think of shows that would they have succeeded if they were done today? Would they have succeeded a year earlier, a year later? So we did 6 of them, only aired 4. And then I went through a long period of not being able to get a job again. I'd been writing movies, but I was on the boat all the time, kind of thinking, no one sends you a letter and says, your career is over as a writer. There's no retirement party for you. You just never know. But then one day, I'm taking a nap on the boat, which honestly, it's a really great place for naps. It rocks. It's really quiet. And I wake up, and I literally have this whole show in my head. I had just pitched a movie to Original Films that we worked on for 6 months with this executive. And it was all about a mediator for divorces. We went to pitch to Neil Moritz, who runs the company. And I go, and it was one of these pitches. I'm ready, it's a 40-minute pitch. And I go, so this guy's a mediator at a law firm for divorces. He goes, I just got a divorce. I don't want to hear about divorce. That was 6 months. But I had done all the research into mediators. So I came up with this idea of a woman who's a mediator, because you're not separated by referees, judges and lawyers, and you have to go in a room and settle something with people who might be quite heated. 5 networks wanted it, sold it to USA because they were going to create USA 2.0. Turns out to be a mistake because they really didn't know what that was. These are some of the changes that the script went through, the revisions, as we headed to production. They thought that this was going to change their network, which it could have, but they kind of didn't know how to do it. We shot it in Vancouver. It was lots of fun to shoot. At the end of the first season, they said, well, we'd like to bring in a second showrunner. And I said, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm leaving. And I didn't know, again, it's the funny things of Hollywood, that they still had to pay me. So that worked out really well because our son was in senior year of high school. And so I went on then to do this show, Normal, for Lifetime. I had written this pilot about a psychiatric hospital 10 years before. Joanne Alfano had read it at NBC, and she called me and said, do you still have that pilot? And I said, yeah, it's mine. It's on spec. And she says, I want to rebrand Lifetime around mental health as opposed to breast cancer. We shot it in Vancouver with Carrie-Anne Moss as the lead. Came out great. First day of post-production, I got a call, Joanne's been fired. So Nancy Dubuque came in, and it was between Normal and The Client List, which eventually aired as a movie, Normal did. And The Client List was Jennifer Love Hewitt's husband died, and she gets a job in a massage parlor, literally the wrong kind of massage parlor. Like, that's the only job you could get on the network for women. So meantime, I started doing a little teaching. I started doing a little speaking. I was invited. I had done a project in Spain, a pilot, and I was asked to be the keynote speaker at this thing called Branducers, which was hundreds of people from all over Spain involved in TV production. And I'm sitting with my friend Risto, who invited me, and I said, I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. And he said, what's tomorrow? I said, my speech. And he said, no, it's right now, after this guy. And he said, you wrote it, right? I said, I'll be okay. So I gave a speech to a few hundred people that I made up on the way, but apparently it was very well received. Started writing a lot of pilots for different companies. These guys were from Russia. They ran the biggest network in Russia. This one, Run, we sold to, it happens all the time, sold to the president of TNT. They were getting ready to shoot it. He left. New guy comes in, drops all the projects. Dago, of course, is about my life. It's my favorite show, but no one's been brave enough to make that. This was a show called Higher, about a guy who wants to build a mile-high skyscraper at the north end of Central Park. It was based on Frank Lloyd Wright's design of the Illinois Tower, which was a mile high. We had this great presentation where everyone in the room got an iPad with actual schematics of the building. You could see what it looked like from the inside, from the outside. And the problem was everyone got so fascinated with the iPads that no one really was very interested in the show. I went to Slovakia to do a mentor students from countries that didn't have TV infrastructure, and my students from Iceland, their show is still on the air. I developed Margaret Atwood's book for MGM and HBO, The Heart Goes Last. And just to give you an idea, because I want to leave time for questions, here are the drafts. That's the 2016 and 2017. Here's the 2018. I didn't put in all the 2019. We spent 6 months negotiating with Keira Knightley to make her the second highest paid person in television. I got a call at 4. I was meeting a German actress I was rewriting a movie for, and they said, deal's closed. I said, great. I got a call at 5:30, deal's off. We had stages in London, we had stages, so it didn't go, but it might go again. Oh yeah, there's more, there's 2019. Wow, I'm exhausted just looking at that list. Went on Rizzoli Isles as one of the executive producers, and then came back here again. My wife had been talking for a while about wanting to live in a small town. We started coming back to Williams a lot. We both taught workshops here. She teaches movement. I was teaching a workshop in writing. We were here for 12 days. 10 of those days, we got invited to people's houses for dinner. And we just thought, this is great. I took a job, got offered a job at Columbia, teaching grad students in writing. And I took the job thinking, I'll fly back and forth from LA, but I'll come up to look at houses at Williamstown. And then Patri was taking me to the train for my first class. She was going to fly out separately. And we saw this house, and she went, oh, this is the house. I thought, oh no, now I have this job. The only purpose for the job was to look at houses. We moved during the pandemic. There she is on our flight from Chicago to Albany. That's in the air, because they were only flying for cargo. So we left our house of 25 years without being able to say goodbye, and arrived without being able to say hello. But luckily, we got to stay in the house Liz lent us. These are projects we're working on today. I'm going to zip through so that we have time for questions. They're all around the world, which is what's exciting, because there's a lot of independent financing separate from networks and studios. I do work with the Inevitable Foundation, which is, their goal is to bring disabled writers into writers' rooms. There's a lot of people who bring disabled actors in front of the camera, but they have a concierge. You can call and say, here's what I need. I want to hire this writer. They'll pay for wheelchair ramps, interpreters. Science and Entertainment Network to bring science into your script in a real way, and Pop Shift, which is conversations about events concerning the world. So I tell my students here, because I'm teaching writing for television here now, like, you have to have a theme for your work. So what's the theme of this talk? Is it, you have to find your way? Is it the twists and turns that life will take? Is it you have to walk through a door not knowing where it leads? Or maybe it's just as simple as this. Maybe it's just about coming home. And that's it. Thank you. We have some time for questions, if anyone has a question. I've answered everything you could possibly know.
How many boxes of stuff you obviously kept most of your writing over the years? How much of that did you bring with you?
All of it. We were moving so quickly. We bought the house. We went back to LA, and I went to sell the boat, and my friend who sells boats says it's going to take a year, 6 months maybe, and we put it on the market on Wednesday, and on Saturday we had a check. The house, we had an open house on Sunday. On Monday we had 6 offers. Thursday it was done. I said, I guess we're leaving. And then, there was this virus in China, which didn't really concern me. It turns out it was concerning. And so we packed up really fast and came, and just didn't really have time to sort stuff. So putting together this talk was the first time I really looked through it all. Who else has a question? Yes?
So, is there any follow-through on the theme from hair?
Here's the follow-through. Listen, this is my good time right now. Low maintenance. So think about that path now. I'm going to talk to John Ballin's daughter. How do I convey this to her? That's the thing. Sometimes people say, especially parents want me to talk to their children, and they think, tell me the path. And I think sometimes they feel like I'm holding it back, like I'm not telling them the road. That's the road, and it's, I think the thing that Fred particularly gave me that really carried over was just to know yourself. So in all these different situations, like some of the best things that happened to me happened from saying no. You have great power in saying no, but there's this giant machine that pushes you toward things. And there's so much insecurity about being unemployed. But if you know who you are and you know that what you really want to do is right, like one thing my dad said to me when I was in year 4 as a really bad waiter, he said, look, are you writing every day? And I said, yeah. He said, do you love to write? I said, yeah. He goes, well, this may be the best time in your life. And it certainly was better than Grace Under Fire. Who else has a question?
Were you an Am-Civ major with Rudolph?
No, it was funny. He did 2 semesters of history of Williams College because he was very prescient. He said there's going to come a time when the names on the buildings don't reflect people in the history of Williams, but who wrote the biggest check. And I'm very grateful for people who write a big check, but he wanted to make sure we knew who President Baxter was and who Mr. Stetson was, and on and on. And then out of that, we got to be friends, and he said, would you take Am-Civ 301? And I said, yeah, sure. And I wasn't a major, but I was sort of the other voice in there. So I took 301 and 302 and 401 and 402, but I wasn't a major. I was an English major.
And is Rudolph passed how many years ago?
Gosh, how many? 8 years ago?
Okay, it's 8 years now?
Yeah. Yes, John.
You know, thanks so much for that talk. It's so funny and heartwarming. I can't help but think of the similarities that we have, even though we didn't know each other. Some of our common friends had, just backgrounds and approaches. It's fascinating. But what happened to Jim?
It's a really good question. My guess is Jim is either super, super successful in some obscure business or living outside. It's one of those. I don't think there's any medium for Jim. We lost touch, unfortunately. But I'm grateful that he had a car to drive me around in cars. You know, that after the Fiat exploded, I bought a Plymouth Satellite Sebring Plus, which was gigantic, and it had cracked windshields. I put letters on it, said the cubist view of California. And then I wound up living in the car for like 4 months. I was between apartments and eating once a day at Tom's Number 5. But it was so great to have a giant car like that in the day. Like you could put a full pizza box down between the front 2 seats and it wouldn't touch on either side. But I think you just have to decide. Sometimes it's good not to have options. You know, I knew my family was really disappointed because they'd gotten me this, like the worst, most gaudy brown briefcase you can imagine with gold leaf on the sides, like these gold rims, and 2 locks. Like I didn't have anything worth 1 lock, but it had 2 combination locks because I was going to be the first person in the family with a briefcase. And I still don't have one to this day, just a backpack. So it's just, you know, knowing that I felt like in my 20s I was avoiding midlife crisis. You know, like if I didn't do it then, like there was so little at risk. My apartment in Venice, I had a thing where everything had to be worth less than $200. So one day a friend of mine gave me his old TV. I said, well, now you screwed me. I got to get rid of my couch because I have to be able to pack up and go at any time. Does anyone else have a question? Yes.
We're in '94, the earthquake up in Northridge. My wife and kids live there now. I was just curious, were you in Northridge or Sherman Oaks or?
Santa Monica.
Okay.
And people didn't know that Santa Monica was hurt so badly. So Patrie was 9 months pregnant, and she went into labor the next day at noon. And we went to Santa Monica Hospital, and there were police out front that said the hospital's closed. We had a brand new Volvo wagon. You know, you think you're all prepared. You go, what do you mean the hospital's closed? It says closed. I said, well, how about St. John's, the other hospital? I said, no, it's closed. And so she was examined by, do you mind if I tell the story, hon? Yeah. In a lamp storage room. Talk about like a bad set, like 75 lamps and her on a chair, like an intensive interrogation with some guy who was like, 26, some intern. And that went on for 4 days. She was in prodrome labor, and we had Nick Thursday night, started Monday at noon. But the hospital, the 2 parts of it, one was on rollers, one was strapped down. They knocked each other out, so they took out the internal wall. So when we had Nick, there were 5 women having babies, just separated by a curtain. There was a young woman, Hispanic, who was alone having twins, and she was kicking me. I was holding her leg. That's how close we were. But it was amazing, like to be around all these women just having babies. Like it wasn't the I picked the wallpaper in my suite kind of birth, but it worked out just fine. Yes.
How would you sum up the impact that Williams had on your life?
Well, I came back, that'll tell you that. It taught me how to think. It taught me to be confident in myself. It actually, for a place that I arrived and I thought, Jesus, what's LL Bean? And why are these people all dressed the same? But it actually, that wasn't the impact. As I said, people were more accepting of me than I think I was of myself and wanted me to be the version of me. And I think it allowed me to go through all those different forces that would have pushed me to be something else. And I just kept saying, no, I'm not that. I'm going to do something else. And I'm really, really grateful for it.
And I think that's the perfect way to say thank you.
Okay. Thank you.